The Untouchables is a 1987 released crime drama directed by Brian De Palma.
Yes, not particularly unknown, is it? But
Not really, no.
So you probably know it's set in Prohibition era Chicago in 1930, and focuses on Al Capone and his efforts to thwart Prohibition by selling liquor wherever he could, and Treasury agent Elliot Ness's efforts to stop him and uphold the law, regardless of whether he agreed with it or not. So. So yeah, it stars Kevin Costner as Elliot Ness and Robert De Niro as Al Capone. I mean, obviously it's based on real events, probably a little bit of artistic license as there usually is in these things. But it's got as Elliot Ness's team, you've got Charles Martin Smith and Andy Garcia and Sean Connery as what's it called? Malone.
Malone, yeah.
Doing
an Irishman.
Doing his best Scottish-Irish accent.
Yeah.
So it makes a little bit of an effort. There's a little twinges of Irish.
A little bit here and
I'm
there.
sure if you are Irish, you disagree with that. But he makes more effort than he does in some films, like Hunt for Red October, for example, where everyone else is doing a Russian accent. And he's like, no, I'm not doing that. and then Highlander, where he's a Spanish man with a Scottish accent.
Right, yeah.
So yeah, it's Sean. You let him off. He does. He's got a great voice
And a great eyebrow.
Yeah. So just let him do his thing. And he won an Oscar for it as well, didn't he?
He did. Yes.
So it opens with Elliot Ness sort of being brought on board to try and stop the rise of crime in the city. We see a shop being blown up. Who the owner won't pay the protection racket. Yeah, so obviously the violence is escalating. So they're trying to stop that. He goes on a raid. And he's also been the criminals have obviously been tipped off, so there's no liquor to be found. So he looks a bit of a fool. So, but yeah, then we move on from there. He gets his team together. He happens upon Sean Connery's character and gives him a bit of a pep talk, and he brings him on board. And then they form the team, and then they go after Capone, who obviously in real life, as you know, and film, he's brought down by tax evasion, and that's how he ends up in Alcatraz. Yeah, and that's sort of kind of Charles Martin Smith's character is an accountant with the was it the FBI?
FBI
yeah. Quite early on, he's mentioning it. He's looking at all the books and everything, and saying, "No, he hasn't paid any tax for this long, and we need to link the money to him, etc., etc." So all through the film, there's this thread of tax evasion. So if you know the story, that's where it's obviously going to end up. It doesn't matter what all the other crimes that Al Capone commits, because it's more difficult to pin those on him. Because usually you get somebody else to do it for him. Well, most people have probably seen this as a bit of a classic.
Yeah. I mean, I think obviously, so why we're choosing to do this. I mean, it's not an obscure film. We tend to try and pick more underrated films. This is a classic. It's a very famous film. Came out in the kind of late 80s. This is another one of those films that I saw when I was probably too young to see it, and I fell in love with this film. I just absolutely adored this film, and I think maybe I've chosen to do it because I haven't actually seen it for quite a long time, and I wanted to kind of go back and rewatch it and see if it still holds up today. And I personally think it does.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's a really great film. Visually, it's just extraordinary. It's Brian De Palma. And unfortunately, I think Brian De Palma actually gets a bit of hate a lot of the time because I think a lot of people think he's maybe a bit kind of style over substance, and a lot of people say he's he rips off Hitchcock too much, which I kind of think he does. What I think actually is he's influenced by Hitchcock, he's inspired by Hitchcock, and he's clearly a lover of Hitchcock. What I've always thought with De Palma is he clearly loves cinema, he understands cinema, which makes a great filmmaker. And yes, his films might not be overly original, but he uses those visual elements and he does really interesting and exciting things with them. Big fan of Brian De Palma. I've always loved his films. I think Blowout is a fantastic film. Carrie is a great film.
Scarface and Carlito's Way.
Yeah, funny as I was never actually the biggest fan of Scarface. I thought maybe I need to go back and rewatch it. When I was quite young when I saw that, and I just found it too nasty. I'm not. Again, I've said before, I'm not the biggest gangster film fan. I love this film. I love Goodfellas. Well, Casino's a great film as well. I mean,
Carlito's Way. What's your opinion on it?
Yeah, Carlito's Way actually, because that's De Palma as well, which is a really good.
I mean,
film.
I remember the first time I saw that, and it absolutely blew me away. I loved it.
Yeah, Carlito's. That's a really, really great film. Even Casualties of War was pretty good. I quite enjoyed that. Was it Dressed to Kill?
Snake Eyes.
Snake Eyes, which we were talking about the other day, which is a really good kind of obscure. That might be one better to do because it's more obscure, that one.
Might save that and do it in a few weeks, yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, De Palma to me, Raising Cain, such a great, you know, and quite very different films. I think interesting if you look at his back catalogue, all of those films, they're very genre films, and they're obviously influenced by genre films of the 40s and 50s when he was growing up. And well, he's probably a bit older than that, a bit younger than that, 60s maybe. But you know, he's a kind of the same age as people like Spielberg, and Joe Dante, and Scorsese, and he's that kind of, you know, end of the 70s into the 80s, and his big career would have happened in the 80s. Bonfire of the Vanities, you've ever seen that?
A long time ago.
Bruce Willis and Tom Hanks. That's a really good film as well. Yes, he's got a really interesting career, and I think this one for me is just. This one's filmed really interesting, actually. It's there's a couple of moments I was going to mention, so I'll just keep talking.
Okay, go for it.
So it's odd, and I was rewatching it again. So I'm obviously older now, watching it, and when I noticed, so when the first scene opens up, so the first scene you get in this is your kind of the camera's looking down on Robert De Niro, playing as Al Capone, and he's sitting in a seat. He's getting, you know, he's in the barber's. He's getting his face, his beard cut. Shaved, and then there's like a girl giving him a manicure, and there's lots of people in the scene, and there's a reporter that's going to come and talk to him. And before all that starts, there's some text overlay which gives you a little bit of information about who he is and where we are in America at that time. And then the text fades away, and what's interesting, then the reporter kind of he steps into what
it's almost like a play, isn't it?
It feels like or even like a musical. I thought, because I don't know. I used to watch a lot of musicals when I was younger because my dad worked in the West End in London. He worked in the musicals, a musician. And what they used to do at the beginning of the musical, you'd have a gauze, and then you'd have all the mostly dancers. They'd be on stage and they'd be like, you know, in silhouettes, and they wouldn't be moving. Maybe a couple of people would be moving, and then the gauze would fade away or rise up, and then they'd all go into the scene. And that's what this film feels like. And there's a couple of moments. There's another scene. Later on, when they're in your it's a kind of establishing shot inside a hotel, and you're going up, the camera comes in, and obviously De Palma is also famous for his long takes.
Yeah, long tracking shots.
There's not too many big tracking shots in this, but so Kevin Costner comes into the hotel, and he goes, is it Kevin Costner? No. Hey, there's a shot. So you go into this hotel, and the camera goes up the stairs, and
when he's being brought breakfast, isn't it?
Yeah, just before he's being brought breakfast, and there's obviously, you know, it's a bit of a seedy maybe hotel, well, it's quite a posh hotel, but there's prostitutes in the hotel, and they're kind of, you know, hanging off men's arms, and the camera goes up the stairs, and there's a moment where a guy, I think the guy slaps another guy, and it feels quite choreographed, quite dance-like. It almost reminded me of Moonwalker, you know, the Michael Jackson music video, which obviously is set in a similar period. It just felt quite choreographed in that way. So it feels very stylized. But on the flip side of that, you've got these incredible acting performances. You know, Kevin Costner, an early role for him, probably maybe his breakout role. Andy Garcia, early role for him. Yeah. And of course, the legend that is Sean Connery, who's just magnificent in this film. He's such a great force to be reckoned with on this film, and he's got some great lines in this film. There's one moment when they're out in Canada, and he like chases this guy down, and he grabs him, and he's like, you know, enough of this running, S-H-I-T, I won't say that word, which I thought was very funny. And then was it later on when he says, you know, he brings a knife to a gunfight? It's great line, and he just delivers them perfectly because he's Sean Connery, and he is a legend. I don't know, there's probably people out there that aren't so keen on this film. It's clearly a throwback. It's a massive tribute to not so much the noir films, but more the gangster films of the 1930s. It's
a bit pulpy, really, isn't it?
It's a pulp film, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, it's almost a bit cartoony as well. I mean, not maybe as cartoony as Dick Tracy, which came out a couple of years later.
Like the henchmen of Capone are all quite sort of caricatures of like gangsters.
Yeah, kind of bulky Italian men. And it does feel like a kind of caricature piece. I have to say, I mean, it's probably its biggest influences, I'd say, would be the James Cagney films, which I haven't actually seen a whole lot of. I think James Cagney played Capone in probably a very famous film. Is it Public Enemy #1, or is that there's a Johnny Depp one, isn't there? That's Public Enemy #1.
That's Public Enemy. He's John Dillinger.
Oh, sorry. Yes, that's right. I'm getting more confused. But I haven't seen a huge amount of the James Cagney films, so I can't reference them personally. Yeah, I think this has got some wonderful set pieces in here. And again, I think De Palma, he plays with his cinematic techniques and he really enjoys them. When that scene when they go to Canada, there's a great shot where the camera moves from outside and they go into this cabin, and obviously the cabin's got no wall, and so it moves from outside inside, and then that's all one tracking shot, and it's all played out in one take. I just think it just works really well, and it's a pleasure to watch. When you get someone who loves cinema in that way, it's just a pleasure to just kind of go along with the film. And I'll stop talking in a second. But of course, and we don't do spoilers, but there is the famous end sequence, which is it's a take on the battleship Potemkin.
The
on
train
the Odessa
station.
On the Odessa steps, so the train station and this at the end.
I mean, it's an iconic scene, really.
An iconic scene, and it's funny watching it again the other day. It's almost a little bit cheesy now, because it's so known, and it's cliche, and it's off this because obviously since watching Untouchables the first time, I have then gone on to watch Battleship Potemkin, so I know it's source material, and that obviously is a very different film to this, and that's not a fun film. This is very different, but I think it's an interesting take on it, and it's one that'll always sit there in my mind as a great movie.
I remember being quite shocked by the violence. I obviously hadn't seen that many violent films at that point, and by today's standards, and even standards then, it wasn't that violent. But you do get a few people shot in the head and lots of blood going everywhere. So
I always remember the scene, and it's a really great scene when Al Capone is talking and he's going around the table, and then he just picks up the bat and he bashes that guy over the head. And then, that's nasty itself, but then you get the overhead shot with all the blood pouring, and this deep, thick red blood. It is a violent film, and it is, I can't remember how old I was, but it was quite shocking watching it.
I wasn't, I can't remember when I saw it, but, would have been about 10 when it came out, so I don't know, maybe 5 years after that. So I guess maybe it wasn't that young, I suppose.
Yeah, but when we were younger, we didn't have. Nowadays, you go online, you can see extremely violent films, and there are violent films out there. When we were younger, we didn't quite have that access to the violent media that's out there as you can get nowadays. So I think it was maybe more shocking for us back then, as possibly it is for younger kids nowadays. But it is quite, and it's quite. I remember being quite upset at certain scenes. I mean, like I said, we don't want to do spoilers. There was a scene I wanted to talk about. I won't talk about it because it is a massive spoiler if you haven't seen it. But it's a really shocking scene, but it's incredibly moving. And I think for me, it's one of my favourite. It's a death scene, and it's one of my favourite death scenes on screen. I think it's performed perfectly. And on top of that, you have this incredible Ennio Morricone score. Which I have to say, I think this is possibly his best American score. A lot of his American scores weren't that great. Obviously, Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and hundreds and hundreds. He's still alive, and he's still going today. He's done hundreds of scores. But this
did
one,
Hateful Eight for.
He did do Hateful Eight. This is true. Yeah.
I mean, I thought there was one. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
He did The Thing.
He did The Thing. Well, there's two scores, isn't there? John Carpenter did.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe John Carpenter took his score and made it more of a John Carpenter-y score.
Right. Okay.
But there was a certain. I think there's a bit when they're in Canada that sounds quite a lot like the score from The Thing.
Oh, okay. Right.
Because I suddenly remember, I was like, oh yeah, of course it's the same guy, isn't it? And that reminded me. But no, the rest of it is, it's a memorable.
It's a great. I think it's a good. It's very menacing. It's also very mournful as well. I think it works, really well together, and it really goes with the film. And it just makes that scene I was talking about just totally work. And and you're invested in the characters.
Yeah, you are. Yeah.
And when it gets to that moment, it's heartbreaking.
It's a gut punch if you don't see it coming.
It's a gut punch. Yeah. But I just think it's a really great film. Yeah. And it's a great maybe not De Palma's best film. I don't know, what would it be his best film?
I don't know.
It's probably his best.
I do love Carlito's Way.
As a good. I mean,
I do love Scarface as well, and I do love Raising Cain.
Because my favourite is probably Blowout with John Travolta.
I haven't seen that. I must watch it.
It's a great. And that's another one that's clearly a guy who loves the technique of cinema. Because that's all about sound, a sound recorder, and there's so much in there that that's just so much fun. That movie.
I mean, I think maybe Untouchables is most sort of pure sort of popcorn entertainment.
It's just bums on seat entertainment,
yeah,
blockbuster film, and it's a good ride. And you know, it's fast. It's about 2 hours long, but it doesn't feel like 2 hours. It's got some extremely memorable moments in there. Yeah, but we have this on. You picked it up recently.
I picked it up. Yeah, I've still got the DVD thing, but I picked it up for £3.99 in HMV.
There you go.
Absolute bargain.
I just have it on DVD still. I don't have it on Blu-ray.
It's widely available on Blu-ray and DVD, and it's because it is famous classic film. It's it's on TV and streaming and stuff like that. So
this film.
Not hard to find. But the Blu-ray is pretty good. It's got a nice picture on it. So I'm sure there'll be a 4K release some point. If there isn't already, I don't know. I haven't checked, but I'm not 4K compatible yet, so I'm not interested. But yeah, I mean, if you haven't seen it, if you have watched, Boardwalk Empire TV series from a few years ago, covers a similar thing. Of course, features a younger version of Al Capone, played by Stephen Graham, and so if you've seen that but not seen Untouchables, then Untouchables obviously show you a bit of his later life, and there's loads of other Al Capone related films that you can watch, but that are probably a more accurate depiction, perhaps. But maybe not as entertaining, because this one is like we said, it's a fun ride.
Yeah, exactly. Mister, you forgot your suit.
Yes, that was very good. It took me straight back into the film.
It's what it's supposed to do. And that was the Untouchables. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, let us know in the comments below.
Yep, hit the subscribe button up there if you've liked what you've watched, and don't forget to hit the bell for notifications. Check out some other videos over there. Come and find us on Twitter and Facebook, and join us next week for another one.